Today, I'm going to tell you the story of the Orang Medan, the scariest ghost ship story in history, if you ask me. I'll be telling you everything you need to know about it, the story of the ship itself, whether or not I think the ship actually existed, and the mystery of what killed her crew. Let's dive into the ocean and try to solve this near-century-old mystery. This video is the most recent in my new documentary series that I've started this year. These videos cover a range of topics from cryptids to prehistory to historical mysteries. So please check my playlist out. It's in the description. So far, I've covered the Loch Ness Monster, the story of another ghost ship which ran aground in Norway and was carrying the Harbinger of Death. I've also covered Auroran and other prehistoric hominids, and a literal prehistoric duck crocodile. So check some of those out after this one. Again, the playlist is linked in the description. Like and subscribe if you enjoy this kind of content, and if there is a topic you'd like to see me cover, then feel free to suggest it. I'm also going to approach this video a little differently than some of the other documentaries. I want to do this one more as if I'm telling you a story around a campfire. I think that'll be a fun approach, especially since this is such a spooky story. This will probably be my shortest documentary as well, but I love this story so much, and I just want to tell it. Okay, let's get to the story. In the aftermath of World War II, the world was in a bit of a rough state. Weapons of mass destruction on a scale humans had never seen had been built and used. Europe was ravaged and in ruins. Africa had seen an incredibly brutal campaign to liberate it. Asia had been a place of some of the most horrifying human rights violations in history. And the Pacific Ocean was filled with spent shells, crashed planes, and sunken ships. And more wars seemed to be about to break out, and some ultimately did. And a lot of things had gone missing, such as artwork still lost to this day, and even dangerous things as well, also some of which is still missing. Yet, despite it being a bad time, the World War was over. The deadliest conflict in human history was past, and there was finally peace again in most of the world comparatively. The world worked to get things back on track, and soon people saw everywhere recovering as the 1940s continued. Then one day, in the Dutch Indies, only a few years after the end of the war, there was an encounter with a strange ship that sounds like it came straight out of a horror story. I've talked about ghost ships before. I mentioned it in the intro, but I made a video about a ghost ship that killed 1/3 of Norway's population because of what it brought to the country. But nonetheless, to me, this is the most terrifying ghost ship story in history, and I'm going to tell it to you. The ship was first mentioned in newspapers in the late 1940s, accompanied by pictures. Depending on the source you look at, you'll probably find a different date for this event. They kind of range across the 1940s, so we'll just put this having occurred in either 1947 or 1948, as these are generally considered the two most accurate dates. The ship in question, the Orang Medan, which means Man of Medan, was supposedly a Dutch merchant ship. A ship which sent out a very terrifying SOS and was later found adrift in the Straits of Malacca. On board was the scene straight out of a horror movie and the beginning of one of the most terrifying unsolved ocean mysteries ever. The sea keeps its secrets, and it likely will forever keep this one too. But we'll talk about what we know and what might be the full picture. The incident of the Orang Medan was recorded in a few official publications, including the Proceedings of the Merchant Marine Council, which is published by the United States Coast Guard. Now, with the setting established and a little idea of what was going on in the world at the same time, let's cover the story of the derelict Orang Medan. The story that is, in my opinion, the perfect embodiment of an ocean horror story. The SOS you heard at the beginning of the video was the beginning of this story. Supposedly, it was heard by multiple international listening stations, which is important because if it hadn't, then we likely wouldn't have the rest of this story. Just like the Titanic, if Phillips and Bride hadn't fixed the wireless set the day before the ship hit the iceberg, we probably wouldn't know what happened to the Titanic today. It would have just disappeared. But because they did, we know what happened, and ships were able to make a mad dash to save them. Anyway, you'll see why these international listening posts were important in just a second. The message itself apparently said the following, quote, "SOS from Orang Medan. We float. All officers, including the captain, dead in chart room and on the bridge. Probably whole of crew dead." Following this, there was an unintelligible mess of confused dots and dashes. A confused mess that made no sense. Then, 2 words came through clearly. I die. Freaky. So, the signal was determined to be coming from the Straits of Malacca. U.S. ships, the City of Baltimore and the Silver Star, were in the region, and picked up the message from the Orang Medan. They, among other ships also nearby, heard the messages and began trying to figure out what they should do. Eventually, the ship's location was determined with the help of the mentioned British and Dutch listening posts. This is why they were important. They triangulated the signal. Since it didn't offer a location, they could only find its source with other means. They triangulated it to a specific area, and the Silver Star was the one to investigate. The Silver Star crew felt it was their obligation to do so, especially since the message indicated the ship was, we'll just say, in a bad way. With the others standing by, they set off to find the Orang Medan. When they found it, it was a derelict, drifting with no smoke emerging from her smokestack. The Silver Star came alongside the Orang Medan, and multiple attempts to hail the crew were made, but none yielded any signs of life. The ship was silent and showed no signs of human activity. Eventually, the Silver Star crew felt they couldn't wait any longer due to the implied threat to human life, and they organized a search party to board the drifting vessel and look for the crew or anyone alive. And what they found on board is just as scary as what the people found on the ghost ship in my last video about this kind of thing. Here we go again. We once again have a situation where this ship was a ghost ship, and everyone on board was dead. Reportedly, they, the crew, died with expressions of terror on their face, like they were looking at something horrifying above them. Even the dog died in this way, like it was preparing to defend itself. The whole human crew looked the same. Dead bodies were sprawled on their backs across the deck, their frightened faces looking up at the sky and their mouths open in gaping terror. Inside the ship, the story was much the same. People on the bridge, in the chart room, in the halls, even the engine room. The crew died with expressions of terror on their faces, looking like they were trying to fight back against something. No one had any signs of injury, though the bodies were apparently decaying very fast. Unusually fast, even. I always imagined the interior of the Orang Medan was dark. We don't know either way, but that's how I always pictured it. Dark and claustrophobic. These pitch-black, tight hallways dotted with the corpses of the crew, the Silver Star crew trying to flip light switches and power boxes to get the lights on. How accurate that image is, I don't know. Probably not very, since the crew supposedly was only around 23 people. There probably wasn't really anyone dead in the halls if the bodies were across the deck, in the chart room, and in the engine room. Though I can imagine the lights were probably off, but it would be just as creepy if they were still on. It was also reported that the inside of the ship was cold, and the engine room on an old ship like this should not be cold. The engine room is basically the beating heart of a steamship. If it goes cold, then the ship is dead in the water. The engine room on a freighter like this at the time should have been over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Not chilly, not cold, and it would take a very long time to get that way, not just the few hours it had been since the SOS had been sent. So, after seeing all of this, the Silver Star crew decided that something really bad had gone down. Obviously, even the radio operator who sent the SOS was found dead, slumped over the set. Some say even his hand was still on the telegraph transmitter knob. The only person, apparently, who didn't die with an expression of fear on their face. Which is interesting to think. Why did this one person survive what happened? And how long were they alive? And how did they know they were going to die? How did they know whatever it was coming for them? It's so scary to imagine being the last one on a ship, with the dead crew all around you, knowing you're alone and apparently also knowing whatever killed them is coming for you too. I'm getting the chills as I record this. It's kind of like a situation where you hear the monster coming down the hallway. I'll cover some theories about what killed the crew in a bit, but for now, let's finish the story of the encounter itself. The Silver Star captain decided they would tow the ship in, and let experts investigate the ship. After seeing everything on the freighter, they decided it was by far the best option. So the tow line was rigged, and the vessels were attached to each other, and the Silver Star was ready to set off back for port, when suddenly the crew discovered there was smoke below decks, and they soon saw more billowing out of the interior of the ship. Within the number 4 cargo hold, a fire had broken out. Realizing the ship could not be saved, the Silver Star captain ordered his crew to abandon ship and return to their own vessel. The tow line was then cut once everyone was on board, and the Silver Star put distance between themselves and the Orang Medan. This action apparently came in the nick of time. The Silver Star crew watched as the Dutch freighter burned, and only minutes after they cut the line and put distance between them, it exploded, and the ship apparently was thrown out of the water for a moment from the force, before splashing back down into the ocean and sinking rapidly. Moments later, the burning Orang Medan sank below the ocean. She took her whole deceased crew, cargo, and other secrets with her, and was never seen again. There are a few theories about what happened here. First, some have suggested that the ship was carrying a cargo full of potassium cyanide and nitroglycerin, which got loose after being improperly stored in the cargo hold. Which, yes, that could explain both the fire and the powerful explosion. Another theory is that the ship had a bioweapon made by Unit 731 on board. If that is the case, it could explain why everyone died and why it would be covered up. Think about it. If extremely dangerous biological weapons were being transported around, would the government receiving them really want that information out there? Especially if the shipment was lost? I doubt it. Especially considering Unit 731 was experimenting with some, we'll just say, extremely lethal bioweapons in World War II. Put the biohazard symbol on screen, everyone. It's time to learn about nerve agents. Another Japanese-made weapon it is theorized the ship was carrying was some type of nerve agent, which I took a weapons of mass destruction course for my degree. Nerve agents are some scary shit, and this situation with the crew really could fit this being the cause of their deaths. So settle down, class. We are in session. Nerve agents, also known as nerve gas, are technically a type of chemical weapon. These chemicals are liquid at room temperature, and they were initially developed in secrecy by the German military before and during World War II, but Hitler never actually used them. These chemicals are extremely toxic and are classified as either a G series or a V series. A G series nerve agent tends to volatilize and dissipate quickly. And because these G series nerve agents aren't considered to be persistent, which is one reason I think a G series nerve agent could have been on the Orang Medan. If it had been a V series, it probably would have killed the Silver Star crew too, because those tend to hang around for a while. By the way, after World War II, a lot of the nerve agents the Germans developed were just dumped in the ocean. Don't you love that? Now that you have basic information about nerve agents, let's talk about if one could have been responsible for the deaths of everyone on the Orang Medan. I'm not sure what nerve agent it would be if one was the cause for everyone dying. Looking at my college textbook over WMDs, which is Terrorism and WMDs, Awareness and Response by John Pichtel, it could have maybe been tabin. It doesn't sound like sarin, or again, a V-series nerve agent. Tabin is extremely toxic, but the issue with it being tabin is that it has a fruity odor, and no such odor was reported. I don't think it would have been sarin either, but sarin is odorless. Tabin was also developed by the Germans in World War II, not the Japanese, but I do think it's reasonable that they could have shared this kind of stuff between each other. Sarin was the same way, discovered by the Germans in the late 1930s while they were trying to develop a new pesticide. The only thing that doesn't really make sense with it is the way they died, looking up at the sky like they were trying to fight something they were afraid of, which seemed to be above them. And you gotta wonder why the radio operator didn't die at the same time. If a nerve agent got loose and wiped everyone out, why didn't it do it to him at the same time? I highly doubt he did die at the same time and it was a literal ghost sending that SOS. Anyway, the Japanese stored nerve agents in China during World War II. The theory goes that since if a US ship was to transport it, it would leave a paper trail. So they had someone else, a non-registered ship, transport it for them. Basically, a freighter who wouldn't ask questions and they just wanted paid. Fair enough. And this could explain why it would be covered up when it killed everyone. Or just never acknowledged. Plausible deniability at its best. And I could even see the ship having a false name if it was being used for this purpose. And the radio operator using that name in the distress call, because that's the name the ship was going by. Orang Medan might not be the real name of the ship in this case. And another reason it might have been covered up after going to hell, and the US used a method that would leave no trail that goes back to them, is something that comes down to this point in time. Think about it. This was when the Cold War was just starting to get icy. I absolutely could see the US wanting to use a method of transporting something like this that couldn't be traced back to them. Especially, again, if it was a Japanese-made nerve agent being transported via ship. They wouldn't want the Soviet Union to learn about it. Food for thought. But, circling it all back around, the nerve agent theory is very appealing and answers a lot of questions about the mystery. What the specific agent could have been, the Japanese developed a lot of nasty stuff like it in World War II. We can only guess. It could have been anything. On the topic of an unsecured hazardous cargo, this makes sense if you think about it. I mentioned that the ship could have been transporting potassium cyanide and nitroglycerin, and those will blow up. The theory is that they got loose in the hold, or seawater found its way into the ship, and it reacted with these chemicals and released a toxic gas and the crew were asphyxiated. Though why would the ones outside be, and why would the Silver Star crew not also be when they found the ship? And again, why would the radio operator not die at the same time? His message sounds like something was coming for him. Scary. His last words were, "I die." So he knew something was about to happen, but how? Maybe he was suffocating as he sent the message? So the rest of this theory is that the seawater would have eventually reacted with the nitroglycerin and caused the fire and the explosion. Another theory is CO, carbon monoxide, poisoning. The theory goes that there was a smoldering fire inside, in the ship's boiler room, and it released CO, which then suffocated everyone on board. And then it continued to burn and spread and eventually got out of control and caused the explosion. This one has some issues, though. Like, why did everyone outside the ship, out on deck, still die? I don't really buy this one personally. I think it has the most holes out of all of the main explanations. One other theory that is not really mainstream but is interesting is that the ship was pirates. Pirates transporting cargo they were paid to transport or something. Piracy isn't uncommon in that area of the world, so it makes sense. And of course, then the ship wouldn't be registered. In all likelihood, in this case, it might have been masquerading under a false name. Of course, pirates transporting illegal cargo aren't going to document themselves. So, okay, sure, I can see a pirate crew having a dangerous cargo and it accidentally killing them. And if you're thinking pirates attacked the ship, well, that doesn't really make sense because the crew had no signs of injury. And nothing was taken. You know, if pirates are going to attack the ship, they're going to loot it, and there's no sign that that happened. Remember, the crew died like they were fighting something, but they had no signs of injuries. So I don't think a pirate attack is the answer either. And there's also an alien theory, but no, just no. One reason people have suggested the ship never even existed was because the records that were searched, including Lloyd's shipping registry, had no record of it. But others have countered that the right records might not have been searched through. Though no matter how many records have been searched over years, the Orang Medan has never been located in any registry. To this day, out of all the records searched, no one has found the name Orang Medan anywhere. and that is pretty strong evidence to the ship not being real. However, there is evidence going the other way too. Also, some have suggested that the ship, if real, could have been, as I've hinted on, transporting something illegal or secretive, and maybe it was covered up when the shipment was lost. I touched on that in the last section, and there are a number of reasons why it could have been. The Coast Guard obviously thought the mystery was important enough to include in an official publication in 1952. I really tried to find it. It was the Proceedings of the Merchant Marine Council, United States Coast Guard, May 1952, but I could only find the October issue from that year, unfortunately. Though the following quote is from the 1952 report the Coast Guard put out. Quote, "Their frozen faces upturned to the sun, staring as if in fear. The mouths were gaping open, and the eyes were staring." Unquote. It's creepy. Now, one thing of note is that even though the Orang Medan is a bit dubious, the Silver Star was a real ship. She had a different name at the time the event occurred, but she did exist. And once again, if it was taking nerve agents from China to the US, then it obviously would have been kept secret. Again, no paper trail to be left. You gotta remember the political tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union at the time. They were both guarding secrets very closely. They didn't want to know what the other had. So this, and the circumstantial evidence that the ship might have actually been from the Dutch colony of Sumatra, are 2 points people who believe the ship was real use as evidence, along with a few other interesting details as well. The international listening posts hearing the SOS at the same time is another of the details that get cited for support that the ship really existed. And new evidence is occasionally still found about the ship. Both sides make compelling arguments, and ultimately there isn't enough evidence either way to prove that the ship was definitely real or not. So I'll leave it up to you to decide what you think. The official story? There isn't one, but most people seem to lean towards the ship being nothing more than an urban legend. Still, I don't know. I think it very well could have been covered up after its cargo was lost. But I will let you make up your own mind on if you think the ship existed or not. Think over all the evidence, over all the facts, and make up your own mind. Personally, in my opinion, I think there's truth to this story. We'll probably never know unless every ship manifest from that era is searched through, and even then, if the ship was going under a false name or wasn't registered, we probably wouldn't find it. But I think something did happen, and this story might have occurred. It just seems like there's too many factors at play here for it to be a full hoax. Such as, again, multiple international listening posts hearing the SOS. I learned in my Loch Ness Monster video that stuff like this usually does have some truth to it, so who knows? Imagine if one day a shipwreck was found and it had the name Orang Medan on it. That would be wild, but no one is looking for it, so I doubt that that'll happen. A lot of sunken ships people do look for never get found. And not just in the ocean either. Even in the Great Lakes, which are much smaller, ships have sunk and have never been found. Such as the SS Bannockburn and the SS Chicora. It's obviously a lot harder to find a ship in the ocean, but unlike a lot of the ships which have disappeared at sea, we know the general area the ship should be in if it was real. That can't be said for a lot of ships. Even passenger liners which have vanished sometimes fall into the category of they could be anywhere. Like the Pacific, which ironically went missing in the Atlantic. That one could make a whole video too, but the SS Pacific was never found. It's somewhere at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, but we don't know where. The point is, if the Orang Medan exists under that name or another and did sink, unless someone actually looks for it, it probably won't ever be found, and no one seems interested in looking for it because that would cost a lot of money. Even though we know generally where it should be, and again, that is something we can't say about a lot of ships that have disappeared at sea, I don't think anyone wants to spend that much money looking for something that, might only have a chance of being real. So this story will ultimately never be answered. The story of the Orang Medan has always captured my imagination ever since I first heard about it. It's like the perfect story to embody the horror that the ocean can be. The ocean is a scary place, and ghost ships are creepy. I talk about this in the video, how a ghost ship killed 1/3 of Norway. And like I said in that, I also think ghost ships are just cool, but very creepy, especially when people seemingly just vanish without a trace, and the ship is still sailing under its own power, but no one is on it. To me, that is just so creepy. Like, I'd also love a horror movie about the orangutan. It could be so scary. A well-done scary movie about this topic would be one of my dream flicks. There's a lot of ghost ships that I could make a video about, like the Mary Celeste, which is probably the most famous one of all. And I thought about making a video on that, but what could I really contribute to the topic? So many videos have been made on that topic, so what could I say that's new? But there are others. The Carol A. Deering, the SS Pachimo, which is a ship that drifted abandoned in the ocean for over 30 years. I'm not kidding, look that up. The North Korean ghost ships that wash up on Japan's coast every year. The Zabrina, the High Aim 6, the Jiansang, which, that is a creepy one. That one I might make a video on later this year because, let's just say it's odd and it creeped me out as much as it intrigued me. And some others, I might make a video compiling them together, telling a few stories in one big video. Kind of like the Cretaceous documentary I'm planning for later this year, where I'll cover 60 animals that existed throughout every single age of the Cretaceous. I might do that idea at some point of doing a few shorter unsolved ocean mysteries in one video. So what do I think, though? After going through all the theories, I really lean towards the idea that the orangutan had a nerve agent on board which got released somehow. I'm not an expert, but this is the general thing. This is what I'm educated in. And it checks a lot of the boxes of it being a nerve agent. Nerve agents will sometimes degrade very quickly. It just depends on the type. And they can be terrifyingly lethal in just a tiny dose. It also would make sense that if the ship was carrying this, it would be sailing under a false name or it wouldn't be registered, especially depending on who was going to be receiving the agent. And then the whole thing would be kept quiet after the agent somehow got released. So I think I lean towards the cause of the deaths of everyone on board being a nerve agent which somehow got released. Though I admit the theory isn't perfect. In this case, what was it that caused the fire? I think the nitroglycerin theory we covered also holds some merit. What do you think killed everyone and destroyed the ship? Let me know. I'm genuinely curious to hear which of these theories you think is the one, or if you have your own idea. But I think, for now, I'm in the camp of the story being true, and that a Japanese-made nerve agent was being transported by the ship, and it got accidentally released and killed everyone on board. That theory makes a lot of sense, and if it was going to the US via a method that wouldn't leave a paper trail, I could see it being fully covered up after it went missing. And if the ship was using a false name for the job, then it makes sense that it wouldn't be in any registry. This is not a perfect theory, but it makes a lot of sense. Anyway, that was the scariest ghost ship story in history, the Orangutan. I love this story a lot, and I hope you enjoyed it and found it just as creepy as I do. And I hope I did it justice. Don't worry, I'm not going to go on a 10-minute rant about ghost ships at the end here like I did in my last ghost ship video. Now, if you do enjoy creepy stories or ghost ship stories, check out my documentary called How a Ghost Ship Killed 1/3 of Norway. That might be my favorite documentary that I've made. Or check out my fully original narrated horror story, version 2. You can find that in the description, along with my other documentaries and all my original narrated stories. Those are read from my upcoming original books, and it would mean a lot if you gave them a chance. Again, I'll leave it all in the description. The next topic we'll cover is another ocean mystery. Not a ghost ship this time, but instead one of the most mysterious disappearances of a ship at sea. The SS Waratah. And other ships I'd like to talk about eventually also include the SS Pacific, the Madagascar, the SS Naronic, and the MS Muchen. I think those will be in one big video, since there's not enough of each one to dedicate a specific video to it. So you have more ocean mysteries to look forward to coming in the near future that might just send a chill down your spine. And the next Paleo mini documentary, which will come sometime after the Waratah video, will cover another frightening secret of the ocean as well. A prehistoric, shark-like fish with a literal buzzsaw for a jaw. Stay tuned for that one, and in the meantime, again, be sure to check all of my documentary content out. I put a lot of work in these videos, and I try to make them the best they can be. Thank you for listening, and have a good one, everyone.